Oh!
In cinema, as in history, Native people have always been present. But throughout the years, how Hollywood has depicted Native characters and their history has changed radically. Now, Indigenous filmmakers are beginning to tell their own stories in Hollywood and around the world. When Lily Gladstone won the Best Actress Golden Globe for Killers of the Flower Moon, she spoke in Blackfoot, her native tongue. It took Hollywood nearly a century to finally show Indigenous people on screen, free from stereotypes and cliches. But long before Lily Gladstone's triumph, Native stars were making movies. Indigenous stories are nothing new in Hollywood. From the start, American directors were pointing their cameras at Native people.
From the origins of American cinema, Indigenous peoples were not at the margins of the screen. They were at the center. Pre-World War I, in the silent era, there was a real hunger among audiences to see what they called Indian dramas.
Story-wise, these silent movies were a mixed bag. Some propagating clearly racist stereotypes, others depicting more positive and complex Indigenous stories.
You had images of villains and noble Indians. You had Indian-white relationships or marriages that worked out. You had those that fell apart. And you also had mixed images of what they referred to as, quote unquote, the evil half-breed, but also the noble half-breed.
And you had Native stars like James Youngdeer, a Nanticoke actor, writer, and director involved in the production of more than 150 silent films, many with his wife, Lillian St. Cyr, or Red Wing. They were the first Native American Hollywood power couple. Or America's cowboy philosopher, Will Rogers, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. At one point, Rogers, who starred in more than 70 films, was the highest paid actor in Hollywood. He even hosted the Oscars in 1934, still the only Native American to do so. But most of the early Indigenous stars have been forgotten, replaced by an image of Native Americans drilled into the culture by hundreds of Hollywood westerns.
Let's go!
We all know the stereotypes. The brave white cowboy fighting the savage Indian to bring civilization to the Wild West. Imagine you're an Indigenous person watching one of these classic Hollywood westerns. Who would you identify with? The cowboy or the Indian?
So you're watching these westerns and the stereotype is that the Indians are stupid and they always get killed. And when I found out I was an Indian, it's like, you know, you don't want to be that because of how they're represented in the westerns.
The first Hollywood westerns took their cue from earlier forms of popular entertainment, paintings, pulp novels, and circus-style spectacles that sold a particular image of the Wild West, an invented history that saw white settler expansion across America as both justified and inevitable, a concept known as manifest destiny.
That goes back to Wild West shows. It goes back to dime novels and the paintings of that era, like Frederick Remington. It is who we are as individuals. We very much are rooted in individualism in this country, as well as manifest destiny, I am sorry to say.
What happened to that boy whose arm I fixed? He was murdered.
Consider John Ford's 1939 film Stagecoach, about a group of settlers traveling west who get attacked. What Ford doesn't mention is that it's the settlers who are the real invaders here.
It's Apache land, it's Indigenous land, and they're always represented on the margins as threatening. The Western is a settler colonial genre. It is about invasion, but it is selling invasion as self-defense.
Most Hollywood westerns also engaged in red facing, casting white actors to play natives, a practice mocked in the 2009 documentary Real Injun. The stereotypes of these old Hollywood westerns continues to shape popular cinema and popular perception of Native peoples today.
Even nowadays, people ask like, oh, do you live in a teepee? And we're like, no, I live in a house. Oh, does it have electricity? Yeah. Is it on the reservation? No. Do you guys ride horses to work every day? No. Does the government pay for things? No, I pay taxes. I have a ton of student debt,
Many westerns made Indigenous people background players in their own stories. It would take decades and a role reversal in the Native narrative before Hollywood put Indigenous characters back in the spotlight. By the early 1940s, with America entering a war to fight Nazi Germany, films showing white settlers shooting natives wasn't a good look.
The U.S. really wasn't interested in sending abroad images of white men killing Indians one by one. That resembled too much fascist genocide.
The end of the war brought a new kind of Western. In Broken Arrow from 1950, James Stewart plays an army scout who negotiates a peace treaty with Apache leader Cochise. The film put its native and white characters on equal footing.
Do you think because I'm an Indian, I'm a fool, you can trick me?
I would not have come here if I thought that. A fool sees only today. It is because I respect you as a leader of your people that I think of tomorrow.
You start having things like Broken Arrow with Jimmy Stewart in 1950, Anthony Mann's Devil's Doorway, also 1950. Both of those are sympathetic Westerns with strong Native characters, but played by white actors in red face. But they're dramas of white sympathy.
By the late 1960s and early 70s, Hollywood's sympathy is entirely with the natives. Neo or revisionist westerns like Soldier Blue and Little Big Man flip the script of Manifest Destiny. Dustin Hoffman in Little Big Man plays a white man raised by the Cheyenne, who retells the old Wild West stories. But now the cowboys and soldiers are the villains, and the natives the victims. Playing Hoffman's mentor is Native artist and activist Chief Dan George. He received an Oscar nomination for his performance, a first for an Indigenous actor.
I am blind, I cannot fight. But I won't run. If it's my day to die, I want to do it here within a circle.
2,000 kilometers from Hollywood, in Vancouver, a young Native girl had found a role model.
That was kind of a huge moment because he lived in North Van and he lived not that far away from where I live. And so I used to follow him. And so it was really kind of cool to see him in Little Big Man and, some of the Clint Eastwood movies that he did. That was I think the first time that it really resonated, that I went, hey, wait a minute, that guy's, he's Indigenous and he's a big star.
A world away, Germany was having its own neo-Western moment. In West Germany, predating Little Big Man by almost a decade, you had the Winnetou films, adventure stories based on German novels about the heroic Apache chief Winnetou and his white blood brother, Old Shatterhand.
Mein Bruder. Mein Bruder.
East Germany's state-run DEFA Studios had its own Indiana film, which were historic stories told from the native perspective. The indigenous communities acted as stand-ins for socialist ideals, anti-imperialist natives fighting the greed and imperialism of the U.S. Army. But these German westerns also featured red-facing. Winnetou is played by Frenchman Pierre Brice, Tecumseh by German-Serbian actor Gojko Mitic. But unlike those Manifest Destiny films, here the indigenous characters are the heroes. Still, native filmmakers, like those who've come to Germany for the Berlin Film Festival, also find these heroic characters problematic.
What I often say to people is just think about the history of cinema and think about what you've grown up watching as being Indian. It's always, again, that romantic notion of being in the wild. It's really romanticized and never done by actually Indigenous people.
Ironically, it would take a big Hollywood star and the revival of the Western to spark new interest in Native stories and Indigenous storytellers. In 1990, the Western was considered box office poison. Then came Kevin Costner's Dances with Wolves. Costner plays a U.S. Army soldier who leaves his former life behind to live with the Lakota. Combining the sweeping scale and imagery of the Wild West shows and those John Ford-era Westerns with a neo-Western perspective of violent white men and Indigenous victims, the film was a mega hit, earning the equivalent of $1 billion in today's money. Praised at the time for its sympathetic portrayal of Native characters, Dances with Wolves has not aged well.
I mean, what you do is you got to see with the eyes and you go, whoom! It's that kind of thing, and it's sound that comes out of you.
Because Costner's character is the hero, and because the Lakota depend on him to come to their rescue, the film is held up as an example of the so-called white savior narrative. His character becomes a better Lakota than the Lakota, learning their language and instructing them on how best to save the tribe.
It's very much like, natives always needed a savior, or, natives had problems that we couldn't solve ourselves, so we needed someone else to come do it.
The white savior narrative is still very much with us. Many critics see a similar approach in Costner's hit series Yellowstone, and fear his new epic Western Horizon will again be a white gaze on Native history.
Those wagons coming, little as they're wanted.
In science fiction, movies like Avatar repurpose the same story, with a heroic white man coming to the rescue of the embattled indigenous people of Pandora, after making their traditions his own.
The white savior trope is not going away. The top two films of the world, I think, are Avatar 2 and Avatar 1, and they're both white savior narratives. And I cringed watching it because it's full of Māori actors, people I know.
However problematic its framing of Native history, the success of Dances with Wolves sparked new interest in Native stories worldwide, and Native filmmakers stepped up to tell them.
You're always trying to sound like some damn medicine man or something. I mean, how many times have you seen Dances with Wolves? 100, 200? Oh, jeez. You have seen it that many times, haven't you? Don't you even know how to be a real Indian?
I guess not.
No wonder, jeez. I guess I'll have to teach you then, ain't it? First of all, quit grinning like an idiot. Indians ain't supposed to smile like that. Get stoic. No, like this.
Chris Eyre's Smoke Signals, the first major U.S. film written, directed, and starring Indigenous people. For many American natives, this was the first time they recognized themselves on screen.
As a 7-year-old, a child, you don't necessarily relate to the 1700s when you're in teepees and buckskin and stuff like that. Films like Smoke Signals, which is really awesome, that showed more modern natives and more modern struggles.
Years before, in New Zealand, Lee Tamahori made Once Were Warriors, depicting Maori life from the inside. It struck a nerve.
From a North American perspective, it was an indie film. It was like a very independent film. But in New Zealand, it was a blockbuster. It was the #1 film for months. It was a very confronting film. It was written by a Māori author, the writer, and made by a Māori director, all Māori cast, and a very significant portion of Māori crew.
Ani, atoni nanurek sa kung ni kanoy madlinurek taris di mangipia.
Canadian cinema struck a milestone in 2001 with Atanarsuat, The Fast Runner, the first film written, directed, and acted entirely in the Inuktitut language. It retells a centuries-old Inuit legend about a curse that destroys a village and a man forced to flee across the ice on foot. The film sold around the world. It was clear Native filmmakers had left the old Wild West show behind, and they weren't looking back. None of the first wave of Native directive movies were huge hits, but they inspired a younger generation of Indigenous filmmakers, including a then unknown Maori director named Taika Waititi.
My dad's not here right now. He's a busy man. He's a master carver, deep-sea treasure diver, the captain of the rugby team, and he holds the record for punching out the most people with one hand. When he comes home, he's taking me to see Michael Jackson live. The end.
I live in a rural village on the east coast of New Zealand, very similar to Boy. And when that film came out, we played it in our community halls and they were packed because people were finally seeing themselves being presented in their own way, authentically by their own people.
Thank you, Boy. Tane, your turn. Get up there. Kia ora, my name is Tani.
I mean, you're a liar. Your dad's not overseas. He's in jail for robbery.
Shut up, Kingy. You don't know.
Yes, he's in the same cell block as my dad.
Not anymore. He escaped.
How?
He dug a hole underneath the fence.
With what?
A spoon.
What about the guards?
He wasted them. With a spoon.
My name is Aileen Spears. I am from the Cree Nation in Manitoba, Canada.
You're gonna see things.
Native Told Stories reframe Native history. Canadian miniseries Bones of Crows shows the generational trauma wrought on Native communities through the residential school system. The government tore Native children from their families, forcing them to convert to Christianity and banning them from speaking Native languages. The explicit purpose was to kill the Indian in the child.
I don't know.
For Native communities, screenings of Bones of Crows were cathartic.
I just have a feeling that something bad is coming. And we won't be able to protect them.
From what?
The world.
What we know from residential school is that, you know, some of these secrets or some of these things that we held in our families hadn't been released, you know, hadn't been told by members who had experienced it. So sometimes in these communities, after watching Bones of Crows, you know, someone from their own community would reveal experiences that they had that not even, you know, their daughters knew.
There's going to come a time.
Even when dealing with serious problems like alcoholism, violence, or the legacy of colonialism, these Native Told Stories have hope, humor, and a spirit of resilience.
You don't let them win.
You know, we have survived as Indigenous people throughout the world, even though governments have tried to annihilate us or kill us off or kill our languages and our cultures, we're still here.
The message that Natives should be involved in telling their own stories appears finally to have reached Tinseltown. So when Hollywood's biggest movie star and its most acclaimed director tried to tell a story about Native history, they knew they needed help.
Whose land is this? My land.
Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon, set in 1920s Oklahoma, tells the true story of a series of murders of Osage natives by white men. Many married Native women. Leonardo DiCaprio's character Ernest marries Molly, played by Lily Gladstone, in a conspiracy to steal the rights to their oil-rich land.
Hungry wolves.
Planning his $200 million epic, Scorsese's first visit was to Osage country.
Impossible. But they outsmarted everybody.
Marty went to the tribe first and he asked, like, can I tell this story? And when they had concerns of like, well, you know, like, what's the story going to be like? How are you going to depict the violence? How are you going to depict the sisters? How are you going to depict the family and the tribe? I think he very much listened to their concerns.
An Osage consultant led Scorsese to completely change a key scene, where Ernest visits Molly at home, and there's a storm coming.
You don't understand about our culture, he said. For example, when I was a young kid, at 5 or 6, I'd be running around my house and my grandma would be there. And then one day I was running around. She'd go, stop it, sit still. Said, there's a storm coming. And she said, sit and be quiet and let the blessing of the storm that Wakanda is giving us, let it wash over us. And we had to sit and let the storm pass and relish, actually appreciate the blessing of nature.
Storm, it's powerful. So we need to be quiet for a while.
It's good for the crops, that's for sure.
Just be still.
Originally, the scene was they were drinking, and he gets drunk, and she can hold her liquor, and that sort of. So no, this is more interesting, but it's that sense of.
It says so much also about the different cultures.
The totally different culture, yeah. It's in the sense I found with the Osage, it's a sense of giving away, giving gifts, giving, and Leo's group, it's taking.
There is plenty of violence in Killers. It is a Scorsese film, after all. But the focus is on the personal, Ernest's intimate betrayal of his wife. The violence of settler colonialism playing out on a domestic scale. But Killers of the Flower Moon is still a native story told from the outside, from the perspective of a white man.
Scorsese kept saying, this is not the white hero like Dances with Wolves. No, it wasn't. It revolved around the white villain. So you still had a white person or anti-hero, the center of the movie, and the camera lingered constantly on DiCaprio, and it really reinforced that he dominated that story.
The Native community look at it and say, oh, what a missed opportunity. There needs to be a Native made and Native directed and Native written version of that story.
But everybody agrees on Lily Gladstone. Native artists worldwide are cheering on her success.
Lily Gladstone being nominated for an Oscar, she talked in Blackfoot at her award acceptance speech, and it makes us all proud, and it makes us all believe that we're able to get there, and uplift each other.
That's why Native artists are looking beyond Killers of the Flower Moon to a brighter future where Indigenous narratives are not bound by the stories of the past. Forget the Wild West show. Native-made storytelling today can be anything and everything. It can be big-budget fantasy, like Marvel movie Thor Ragnarok from Maori director Taika Waititi.
I thought you'd be glad to see me.
It can be low-budget sci-fi, like Night Raiders from Cree Métis director Danis Goulet.
Are you ready to give yourself to your country completely?
Which reimagines the residential school system as a futuristic dystopia. It can be horror, like Blood Quantum, from the late Micmac director Jeff Barnaby. It's about a virus that turns everyone non-native into zombies. It can be comedy.
Oh, thank you for your donation. Excuse me for my beauty now, for I shall give you some ancient Native American wisdom here.
Like the streaming series Reservation Dogs from Taika Waititi and seminal filmmaker Sterling Harjo.
What kind of gang was both red and blue?
Indian Mafia couldn't make up their minds if they want to be Bloods or Crips more. Maybe they're Blips, or maybe they're Cruds.
It's happening. It's like I'm getting chills thinking about it. there's so many things I can now reference that have been directed by Indigenous people, written by Indigenous people, produced by Indigenous people.
And whether the Indigenous stories are futuristic, sci-fi, fantasy, Western, queer, any genre, because it's Indigenous people were like, our imaginations are incredible.
Native characters being imagined on screens today are authentic and complex, crazy, kick-ass, contradictory, and hilarious. The old era of two-dimensional Native villains and victims is past. For the future, Hollywood's job will be to help Indigenous artists tell their own stories. What do you think of the depiction of Native characters on screen, past and present? Let us know in the comments.
When I get a drop, when the Glock go pop, pop, pop. Bullets can't be stopped. That line 'em in chop when the Glock go pop, pop, pop.